Merriner and his home in Gloucester. Okay, John, to start with, could you tell me a little bit about your academic career? First off, where did you go to school?
All right, I undergraduate went to Rutgers, New Brunswick campus, and from there to NC State in Raleigh. Back in the days when the North Carolina university system was going through a plethora of names when they were trying to decide what they would call themselves in the individual campuses. They were forming the greater university system. And NC State, zoology, genetics, zoology, and then for a master's, PhD was in zoology with zoo, and it was called stream sanitation.
Stream sanitation?
Matter of fact,
How
stream
about that?
sanitation. Surprise.
What year was that about?
Oh, dark ages. Graduated '64 from Rutgers, and terminal degree, PhD in '73 from NC State.
Okay.
From there, went to work at the College of William and Mary. Actually, was VIMS, Virginia Institute of Marine Science, which was at that time co-hosted by William and Mary and the University of Virginia. Both offered graduate degrees in marine science. That was 70s actually when I left campus, Raleigh, and went up to Virginia and finished my degree in '73. Stayed there, left VIMS in, what was it, 80, fall of 80. While in Virginia, worked mainly bay fisheries, Chesapeake Bay fisheries, coastal fisheries, interjurisdictional fisheries. It's just more than 30 words or less, but anyway, interjurisdictional fisheries, coastal fisheries, menhaden, striped bass, weak fish, cyanids is my species group du jour that I groove on.
And specifically, though, when you were a graduate student, what was your research topic?
Life history, natural history, and applications to management of weak fish.
Oh, weak fish, okay.
For the dissertation, and hybridization and sunfishes for a master's.
Okay.
And in the fall of '80, came down here on a what's called the euphemism would be in international terms a limb lease program, but it's an interagency personnel act. Came down to Beaufort Lab at National Marine Fisheries, as a on IPA, as the euphemism goes. And 2 years later, a little over right about 2 years later, position came open. I had applied and was accepted and got the job at Beaufort Lab in fall of '82.
And what was that position?
It was Division Chief of Fisheries Division at the Beaufort Lab. Programs there were reef fishes, life history, fishery management, population analyses of reef fishes, which included the headboat survey from North Carolina eventually through Texas, but to begin with it was just the North Carolina through North Florida in the early days while I was there. Here, right. And also dealing with menhaden again, a major program with menhaden, again, coastal fisheries, Gulf and Atlantic, life history sampling, tagging studies, management, interaction with interjurisdictional fisheries management. So the whole, that has given me, transitioning, if you would, into experience in management, thing from work at VIMS, with experience with Maine to Florida, through the Atlantic States Marine Fish Commission, dealing with cyanids, weak fish, etc., fluke, American eel, striped bass, and a variety of other species that were mainly territorial sea species. Major emphasis on Chesapeake Bay, because Virginia was the charge of that institution I was working in for the state of Virginia. It's a state agency. And then from Virginia, Chesapeake Bay area, came here. I gave experience then with menhaden, the tie still to Atlantic states, Atlantic menhaden, and Gulf states with menhaden. Some crossover information with reef fishes in that management from both council experience, joint management of selected species, the mackerels, for example, and others. And we were doing some work, natural history work and some tagging work on mackerel during that same period, early 80s, excuse me. Generations fly when you get to my age. Then that had continued till about 1995 or so, when Al Jones, who had been the Miami lab director, had retired, and the Southeast Science Center, headquartered out of Miami, and asked if I would more or less become, I'll say, liaison or point contact for at least for the South Atlantic Council, for the agency. I said, okay. I didn't say, yeah, okay, because we were working primarily at the Beaufort lab, dealing primarily with the South Atlantic Council relative to reef fishes. But to broaden the exposure, then to get a point contact for dealing with the South Atlantic Council, we were the lab nearest the South Atlantic Council's area and home office. And then there was a point contact in the Gulf of Mexico, who was Tom McElwain handling that touch. And in Miami facility maintained a touch point into the Caribbean Fishery Management Council. So that's the way I'll say liaison or a common point contact, so that you have a rapport with the staff, a rapport with the council members, and a rapport with the fishermen who may be that you're dealing with. And
right.
so you try to dispel, in that sense, one of the main functions, but one of the main functions was to sort of serve as a science touch. The Science Center, I won't say spokesman, but represent the Science Center at the council meetings and serve as a point of reference or a point of information. If somebody had a question about something, they would come to you rather than going 50 different directions at the same time. This in any bureaucracy, which the agency is, or was, being retired I can say was, but it still is, any bureaucracy. The difficulty becomes one of the ploy that fishermen or that lobbyists or that those with particular vested interests do, is to try to pit one part of the agency against another, or one scientist against another, and look for differences in opinion, differences in what's going on, or ask a scientist a policy question, which is always the hard part, the harder parts. To get a response back from a scientist, and when you're hinting or attempting then as a public, or as a lawyer, or as whatever who's posing the question, a policy issue, then it becomes awkward, to the point awkward in the sense that to the agency it's awkward, to the individual who had to offer or decline to offer an opinion or a comment, into the rest of the administrative structure. Okay, I couldn't get, at that point, Brad Brown was the center director. I couldn't get Brad in a sling. I didn't try to get Nancy Thompson in a sling, and I sure as heck didn't try to get Hogarth or any of the preceding directors of National Marine Fisheries Service or of the fishery management branch in headquarters in trouble.
Right.
I'll say in trouble. Politically hot questions that people ask, i.e. the mackerel questions.
So they're supposed to come to you, or they were directed to you?
For science, as a science contact point. And what I would typically do would be, if it was a straight natural history question, something that was not policy laden, or was a technical question that had to do with analysis or this kind of thing, I would try to be the direct point of contact, provide the answer, provide the additional, if you would, write-ups that are available, reports that are available, scientific literature that's available. Not to fend off the question, because the only way that the public can really be public and fishery managers who are, well, as yourself as a commissioner, to be understanding rather than taking just the anecdotal, I'll say anecdotal comments of an individual, to have read the background, to have been able then to base your opinion or your conclusions on the background information as it exists. And I tried to make sure that those who were posing the questions to me had that kind of background information, which I think is critical to maintain credibility and for that individual to maintain their objectivity and let them decide on their own level of ethics or whatever else they care to employ. And they could put their own spin on the information as they saw fit, because there are ways you can put spin on data. They cut both ways. And in dealing with that, dealing with the councils, for example, or dealing with the Atlantic states, both of them had advisory committees. Atlantic states has technical advisory committees, technical committees. They have fishery representatives on advisory committees to different fishery management plans that are in place, to the boards, as they're called in the ASMSC parlance.
Right.
So that there's a menhaden advisory board, there's a striped bass advisory board, and it has people from recreational, commercial, and environmental interests up and down the Atlantic seaboard for their case. Gulf of Mexico similarly. In the council perspective, there are advisory panels that are principally fishermen, commercial and recreational interests and environmental interests, who provide advice, guidance, comment to the councils, and likewise for the state programs, to the state programs, on what issues, if there is an issue that's brought forward through the system, their interpretation of the status of things, going up and down or sideways. If they want to blast an analysis that has been done by the Science Center and has been done by state analyses, they can blast it any way they want to. It's sad to say it's all on the public record, so if someone wants to be a real anophile, they can be an anophile, but it's on the record for posterity. So you have that. The awkward part as a scientist and as science center and or technical reps is when people come to an advisory committee meeting or come to a public hearing to give, quote, testimony. Every word is spoken has technically, excuse me, not technically, I guess, but legally or administratively, all the veracity as anything else. It's all has to be considered truth. It's called testimony. It's called input, as some people say input, but it's called testimony.
At any public hearing.
At public hearings,
Right.
for comment and comment or whatever else. So it's part of the public record, and quite often comments that are made by public, various segments of the public, may be hyperbole. They may be misstatements, either from sins of omission or commission, however one chooses to play the game. But all of those come back in and are factored into the management process by the council, by the technical committee, by the scientific staff, or whatever else. It's awkward sometimes to have people give comments that are not, as a scientist, you know that they're not, and from what you know about the fishery, you know that they're not straight.
Right.
So it's blowing smoke. The sad thing is that the evolution of fisheries management has been one that has been one of a matter of, for want of a better word, I'll say distrust of the state or of the feds. The feds are always got a distrustful posture. So there isn't that level of trust to the user public. Historically, this had been, I won't say ignored, but it had been handled by the fishing public by one of giving hyperbole as testimony. And then people go away until the resources decline further, the fishery's gone further into the dumpster. And well, we got to study it more.
Right. Okay?
Denial, study the hell out of it. Oh shit, we got to do something, you know?
Are you saying that the testimony is given equal weight to a scientific study?
No.
Okay.
It is whoever makes the comments, each is treated as being straight.
I got
Okay.
you. Okay.
In the sense of from what I understand from the lawyerly mode of it, it's all quote testimony. It's all part of the public record, and it can be dredged up and used as quote testimony. I think is part of the public record and part of any lawsuit that may come forward out of under ASMFC or the feds. So that's a bit of the frustration that one gets in dealing in management and dealing with segments of the fishing public. There has been an evolution, as I said, in both the awareness and astuteness of the fishing public, all segments. There has been an evolution and improved management process, if you would. There has been an evolution and improvement in the database that is being used for management.
And improvement in the level of the students, don't you think?
That's what
People getting a little more savvy.
That's what I'm saying is the first part for the people that are becoming more and more savvy, and that it's available to folks. Technology is a wonderful thing, and the greater awareness and technological savvy that the public, fishermen, and lawyerly and environmental and government, for that matter, is now has improved. Everyone has access to the information. It's transparent. The systems. You show me yours, I'll show you mine.
Right.
Here are the data. Well, I don't like that. Those are wrong. You can argue about it, but those are the data.
Right.
Okay. Well, I lied. They said I gave you the wrong data. I filled out the blanks wrong. You're missing data. Well, a statistician can generate numbers, not made from whole cloth, but can generate numbers in the statistical technique of missing data. You can fill the cells in a matrix by a statistical manipulation. It comes up with missing numbers. It will be in the bounds. It won't be an outlier. That's what I'm saying. The cell will be filled with the average of averages. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So it won't blow an analysis at right that missing link. But those are then, in some senses, could be argued as being they're missing data, they were made up data, or whatever else to the fishermen. Okay. Right. It's smoke and mirrors. The scientists are giving me smoke and mirrors. But that's still part of the old school fishermen. Okay. As I started to say, the evolution of fishermen and fisherman logic has been tremendous in the 40-some years that I've been exposed to fishermen and whatnot. In the dark ages, if you would, back in the 60s, which is the limit of my experience in terms of dealing with fishermen, commercial interests, and recreational interests, have been that they were curious and that everything was in cycles. Commercial fishermen was not as wide-ranging nor as technologically bound then as they are today. There was still a bit of the classical fisheries, the coastal fisheries. The state fisheries were coastal fisheries. There was not this penchant for offshore snapper grouper. And saying, oh, this is a major fishery in the southeast. Well, it isn't, quite honestly. The emphasis on, the emphasis was on coastal fisheries and domestically produced fisheries. This is before FCMA, okay, before Fishery Management Conservation Act, 76. Fisheries were not viewed as an issue nationally and at state levels. They were viewed as being little brush fires that you put out and handle it and just let's perpetuate, because the fishing community, back to communities, I'm not paying lip service to your discipline and interest in sociology, but that was a very important part of the coast. The fishing communities, the round of fishing and everything else that went on down east for here,
Right.
down Stump Sound, down the rest of them. This is before you see the major development of the coast taking off. Before there was that liquidity of cash and the blossoming of the coastal development. Mushrooming is better than saying blossoming. Mushrooming. Up from manure comes manure. But anyway, and it grows quickly. The trend then became one of, for international fisheries before Magnuson Act, had been one of the foreign fisheries where foreign fleets were working our coast, trawlers. The Japanese were catching the tuna. They had the tuna known better than we know them now. I'll say better than, at least as well as we know them now. They knew them in their worldwide fleet and what was going on, where they would be when with thermographs, the temperatures and seasonal distributions. The Soviet bloc was catching mackerel, that is Boston mackerel, river herring, shad, etc., offshore in big factory ships, making fish meal, making herring roll mops, pickled herring, if you would.
What did you call it?
Roll mop. The Scandinavian thing is a pickled fish that they're called roll mops.
Roll mops.
Roll mop. R-O-L-M-O-P.
Oh, R-O-L-M-O-T?
P.
P. I mean roll mop.
So it's a pickled fish.
Okay.
And it's served on a tray, and they roll it up, roll the fillet up. And then it began to evolve with Magnuson Act into saying, oh, there has to be a bigger picture and a role for the U.S. fishery. We've got to protect the U.S. fishery because there was a U.S. trawler fleet that was looking at it, and I won't get into the whole history of what all went on with stuff, but it was one of those that push the bad guys out, push the foreigners out type of thing.
In 76.
In 76 when Magnuson Act.
And was that about the time when the government was encouraging
Domestic development, fisheries development, right.
and capitalization?
Loan.
about-
Fishery loan programs.
Mhm.
Salt and stall funds and fishery vessel loan programs was coupled to that so that the U.S. fishery could replace some of the old side trawlers, whatever else that they had been using historically, the wooden hulls with steel hulls and going offshore.
Okay.
The development of the U.S. fleet to replace the foreign fleet that
Right,
was working
right.
was the logic there, so we would domestically reap the benefits of what had been going away, or negotiated away, if you would,
Uh-huh.
under the State Department bilateral treaties and stuff that had existed in the past. But today we have international fisheries that are very active, charismatic, if you would, species of interests, be they shark or be they primarily in the tunas, be they yellowfin, bluefin, and mackerel, marlins, and whatever else. The game fish sector, coupled with the bluefin, game fish, and international markets for the sushi, sashimi kind of activities. So with the globalization of the world economy, with the added technology, with the added processing, prepping, and handling of fishes and fish products, from freezing, blast freezing, and IQ individual quick frozen fishes to the whole spiel of catching a giant bluefin tuna, put him on a truck, he's in an ice bag, and put him on the plane, he's in Japan tomorrow morning.
Right, right.
So that's fresh fish that's actually fresher than we can get domestically fish in the market, of domestically caught fish. But that is a high-end, that's the filet mignon that you're looking at.
Oh, yeah, high dollar.
High dollar thing. So that has driven a lot of fishermen and politics into those because that's the lottery hit, when you're hitting a lottery type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other fisheries, I won't say have been ignored, but they're still down several rungs from that in the sense of value to the fishermen, etc. So that the individual fishermen or fishing families or fishing communities are then still dependent, as in North Carolina, still dependent upon a variety of resources that come available to them throughout the sequence of the seasons. And they are still pursuing those to the extent that they can, or to the extent that the resource is still sufficient to support a fishery for them, or that there are fish houses available in which they can offload them in their community. Otherwise, they have to go to a centralized fish handling area,
Right.
of which there are few and far between for those in North Carolina, but I gather that was part of your else committee discussions that you had on coastal water access and development,
Yeah.
type of thing. But back to where I come from with fish and fishermen. I was lucky enough professionally to have a lifelong personal interest in biology and personal interest in fishing, albeit my roots were in freshwater areas, okay, so away from the coast. So from trout fishing, fly fishing, national forests, clean water, clean streams, etc., to rivers and sunfish and brim and catfish and that whole gig. From walking in the rivers, wade fishing, to floating in the small things, to coming then after too many years of education, coming to the coast, and then working with fishermen. In the process, working with fishermen, my exposure had been one of doing dissertation work. I've been working with pound nigger, haul seine, and trawler folks. Lived summers, two summers here. Dealt with Billy Smith, dealt with Monroe Taylor. In Hatters, dealt with Lee Peel and some of the other folks. Worked recreational fisheries survey, which was going on through Dr. Hassler at State, was my major advisor. And he had a recreational fishing survey thing going on at Hatteras and at Oregon historically. Participated in that in the summertime and knew the charter captains and had some idea of the historical database of what recreational fishing was going on. Commercial fishing at that point was still inshore in the 60s.
Right.
So there was haul seines, there were crabbers, there were pound netters, and at that point pound netting had declined a lot, way down. Before the advent of major blossoming of gill net fishing, which we have. That's a relatively recent event. Those gill nets were targeted fisheries for, at one point in time, largely go catch some mackerel, set a few mackerel, set some for trout. But therein gave my exposure to the logic of a fisherman type of thing, and that was still back to the idea of seasonality, trends, long-term average. This is best it's ever been. It is the worst it's ever been. It's the best it's ever been. There's never an average to a fisherman.
Yeah.
And some of that depends upon what their own financial conditions were and what other practices, what other things they were involved with. If they were a full-time fisherman, then they went from one fishery to the other, or perhaps engaged in two simultaneously in some sense, with somebody else sharing with them on gear. Same fisherman may be involved in a pound net fishery, a haul seine fishery, and somebody else running another boat and crabbing for them. Is a sort of a family unit or a little community niche that they were all physically, with an F, involved in to make the fish house go. To make it go that way.
So did you actually, in those early years, go out on these vessels and sample?
Sample from catch, as landed, help set pound nets, menhaden, that type of thing. I did not go out and worked a haul rig a couple times on haul rig setting at a Hatters as well, but round hauling.
And of course there was not that mandatory observer type of situation. They just volunteered to say, sure, we'll take you along.
Well, they were interested. One way you could say it, you're sort of a curio, but you also had then, as a student or as a research person, you were then as welcome as your predecessors had plowed the ground. If there was animosity to prior folks, or that they were real, then you had to earn your trust, and you had to earn your trust and to any person. And I think that's true whenever you're dealing with anybody. I mean, you don't come in as being your best thing since sliced bread up front. Okay, there's always something you have to develop a rapport, enough trust with an individual that you're a straight shooter, and your input can be trusted. You're not blowing smoke at them. You're not doing that thing. I learned from people that I dealt with in those years, fishermen, some of their perspective of where they were coming from, some of the familial ties, some of the historical ones. But I can't say what made them tick, but I'm saying that they're honest, I'll say wholesome, but not meaning it in that fashion, but interest in the fish and in the environment, and in the public and family and the community. So it was all part of the base. None of them that I dealt with at that point were out to get. This is before the logic of the tuna, the bluefin tuna type of thing. Of jackpot. These were year in, year out, make a living, experience it. And in that sense, one of the watchwords that I was given by a guy that I've had cytogenetics from, excuse me for digressing. The logic holds. Cytogenetics professor said, okay, here's this, you know all of this technical stuff about the genetics and whatever it is and some other manipulations that are going on. He says, explain it to me. This is part of his practicum type of thing before he finished his course. He says, but I'm your grandmother. You know, before planes. You know. And it sets people back.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that, I'm coming back to the point of saying dealing with the public, dealing with fishermen, or dealing with politicians, or whomever. It is being able to explain things in everyday terminology so that you're using terms that are understood.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists, or some, tend to have a very large vocabulary, and perhaps they're polysyllabic, overly so in conversation among themselves, and in some cases don't make the transition to, I'll say, average citizenry level of awareness of the technical side of it that they would in talking to their peers in the scientific community. So you have to be able then to break down for want of a better word, I'll say a caste system that to some it's a perception thing. Yeah, there's
Mm-hmm.
those that know the language, the lingo, those that don't know the lingo,
Yes.
and that you can't communicate unless you come to common ground. And that's the issue that I think is still with us a lot in fisheries management, in science, translating science to the public. And I think therein lies probably the root of whether you're successful or not in getting the trust of the public that's being served by the governmental offices, and whether or not people can understand the concepts or the issues that are going on. Fishermen and general public understand the biological side of it a lot, and declining water quality and too many people on the coast and septic tanks that bubble,
Right.
and dredging and kicking and there's no seagrass in here like it used to be, and it's slimy and it's sludgy and and here's 22 lots over here on the 11 acres, you know. And well, there's septic tanks. Well, Whiters Creek is the primary nursery area. Okay, was, still is.
Yeah.
There are no houses there yet beyond what were there for the last 15 years. Excuse me, 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Which at the last time one was built over there. But they're coming, and I think Whiters Creek will no longer be a primary nursery area when that happens, because it will be less productive as so. It will still be a primary nursery area to the extent that it can, to the extent that global climate change brings water up over this house or up to the doorstep of this house, and it then extends the marsh further up into Dark Swamp, which is just to the north of the headquarters of Whitehurst. So the understanding the processes that are going on, the complex processes, whether it's a former vice president explaining global climate change, global warming, okay, there's the buzzword question, global climate change. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Global warming, you can understand, well, it's getting hotter, right? Okay, on average it's getting hotter.
Right.
And then the role of man and man's impact in that. But you can talk about the environment, environmental shifts. The fisherman says, well, there are cycles. Yes, but our human growth and our human impact on the environment is having an effect. I don't think anybody will question that. The fishermen will say, yeah, but there's still cycles. Well, the range in those cycles may be exacerbated now because it's good, the bad, the ugly, and they may not support what it used to because of the changing quality and things. More fish kills, changing phytoplankton community, more DO sacs, fish kills, less eelgrass.
Changing distribution, it seems.
Right. And, well, that's part of the spin out we said. If there is global climate change, global warming, if there is an expansion of the range of some species, we've seen some evidence off of here with long-term comparisons that were done back in the late 60s, early 70s, I guess. Early 70s. Pete Parker, Dave Colby, etc., had done some video transecting work and diving. They were mapping, coming up with an estimate of the aerial extent of reef habitat. Now, this is the North Carolina type of reef. This is rocky outcroppings, right? Not the hermaphroditic corals. There we go again. Not the regular tropical corals. Not the real pretty stuff. You know. But they found species that were occurring from hook and line records, from other catches, from video surveys, and from diver surveys that they went down and counted fish. Went back out in the 80s, or 90s rather, same sites or similar sites, resurveyed, and found some up, some down, some no longer there, but an influx of more tropical species into the area. And we are understanding that as being a evidence, if you would, of an expansion of range of some of the subtropical species or tropical species into the areas further north, and becoming established enough that they're not just larvae and young of year, but they are older year classes that are available. So that you're seeing some signs of community shifts with change in climate, if you would. So those are longer term shifts and changes, because you can go back to any number of records that, at Hatteras, you can go to Montauk, you can go to Cape Cod, and there are records in those northern areas of tropicals occurring in the summertime, in the late summertime, that have been larvae wafted northward, Gulf Stream eddy spin-offs, filament spin-offs, so that they get dropped there, but that's dead end. I mean, they're not going to survive the winter type of thing. So that's the kind of thing to be aware of when we see, oh, there's most fish there's ever been. Well, I'm glad there are.
Yeah.
Or looking at nurturing and declining quality, looking at environmental conditions and shifts and changes. The other underlying thing, beyond the natural history side of it and beyond the changing environment and the human perspective here, one of the, again, it's technologically driven. Technology is perhaps one of the best things going for us in terms of modern life and whatever else. Hey, electricity, we can see, tape record, etc. And also, it's one of the worst of times to commercial and recreational fishermen. We have vessels that can tow, it used to be shrimp trawlers, 20-footers, 28-footers, 32 feet long. Single net. One net behind the boat. Okay, then they had two nets. Instead of one 28-foot net, they had two 20-foot nets, which actually gave them greater opening to recover more area between them. And now 4 barrels and then skimmer trawls and whatever else. So increasing capacity, horsepower, increasing efficiency, increasing reliability in a nutshell, and position keeping and knowing where you are. And if you're working offshore, outside the inlet, and working along the coast, you're no longer doing pine tree and water tower navigation, but rather you have GPS and you have plotters. So you can be just as accurate as a farmer, as a mega farmer and agribusiness today, of applying GPS and applying conditions as to where you are. You can make repeated transects up and down an area, so you have basically plowed the field. And wherever your trawl course is, you can show on your grid, if you were having good catches, you can keep going either along that depth contour, which you can get plotter and you have bathymetry laid out and overlaying on your plotter. You can stay right on that depth contour where you think things are. Or you can continue to go up and down the field and cover it till you've wiped everything. I say wipe that field clear.
Very precise.
Very precise type of thing. So technology has been the best of times, the worst of times.
Well, I hear a little bit of feedback. Do you?
I heard a little bit echoing type of thing. So.
Let me just turn this down a little bit.
But anyway, so technology shifts, technology changes. It's good, it's bad. one of the things that technology has done in terms for coastal fisheries, in terms for domestic fisheries, coupled with, if you would, the globalization of markets, be it in agriculture and what we're eating. So we're eating strawberries now, but in December we were eating strawberries too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
We're doing some aquaculture in this country. It began as catfish and whatever else. We're doing some shrimp culture domestically. We're doing some fish culture. There are activities beyond salmonid culture, if you would, trout and cold water stuff. We're doing some marine aquaculture. The trick has been that the coastal fisheries, I don't mind and never did mind the picking of, peeling the skin back after you've broiled or grilled or fried a fish, and picking around bones to get the meat. The modern consumer today is not picking around bones, but rather we're eating a boneless, skinless fillet, and we're targeting not spot, croaker, and weakfish, but rather snapper, anything red that can be called a red snapper, grouper,
And a variety of things that are
and a
called
variety
grouper.
of things that are called grouper. How many species of grouper are? Well, there's a whole bunch of species of grouper. Well, there's all group as a market category.
And there's
grouper.
many imposters,
And
apparently.
there are many that get called grouper that aren't. So therein lies where science and technology has grown along with that to be able to detect, and it's from the genetic background, and says, okay, well, we can now go in with the new tools, and just like we can catch criminals with fingerprinting, not just the fingerprint per se, but rather the genetic fingerprint and allelic frequencies, we can do the same thing with fish flesh from whatever. And the people in the Charleston lab in particular had been developing that library, if you would, a genomic kind of library, a species genotype or recognition, for want of a better word, I'll say this is the page that says this is what a spot looks like, genetic in a protein spread, in a genetic spread. But yet this thing is called spot in the market. It doesn't match up to that. It actually matches up to a species gazuga, that comes from western India.
Right.
But it's being sold as spot. So that there is that fraudulent nature in terms of that. And there are, anytime there's a differential between a fish that's readily available in some part of the world for want of a better word, I'll say peanuts, very cheap, that you can freeze it in pallet fashion, in box fashion, or individual quick freeze, put it in a 40,000-pound box car, tractor trailer rig, maintain it in frozen state, ship it on the container ships, and import it into the U.S., paying the freight and paying the middleman for each one of those changes of hands, and then market it for something in the U.S. or anyplace else in the world. Market it for someplace else that would be at prime dollar analog. Okay, you're looking at now. This is the substitute for
Right.
but you're marketing it at the price of what that thing is coming in at. So that the margin is horrific, and that therein lies a lot of our difficulties in if you would, the forensics side of fisheries management, law enforcement, and marketing.
And thinking about our increasing reliance on imported products in this globalized age, and relying on fish that may not even be the fish you think it is, okay, could possibly be harvested with less than,
Probably
ideal conservation methods.
Well, there's some actions have been taken domestically, and that had gotten back to shrimp and use of TEDs from Endangered Species Act and trawl excluded devices, so that the international community who are catching shrimp and from whom we're importing wild-caught shrimp had to be using turtle conservation efficiency measures equivalent to what we're using in the U.S.
But then if you go
in the cultured side of it, if you go on the macrobrachium and the cultured pond cultures, that doesn't apply because you're raising them in your bathtub. Tilapia, you're raising them in a bathtub.
Yeah.
You know, they're freshwater fish, they're freshwater shrimp. It don't taste like the real thing does.
And then mangrove.
And now you've got the
areas are
problem.
getting
Now you got the
destroyed.
problem of one, quality control. Well, they're beautiful if you look at them in a freezer pack. As some of these shrimp laid out, you know, they're 10, 16 count, laid out individually. The heads and tails and the line and whatever else. They're uniform in size.
Yeah, yeah.
It just don't taste quite the same. But well, if you
Right.
put a good scampi sauce on it now and you butterfly it, and you know, who can tell the difference?
Right.
It's part of the question again comes to one of its international, and we have then the domestic market has become specialized to the point that we want top end product. We want portion control of top end product. We want shrimp and non-shrimp season. So you know we're getting frozen.
Yeah.
We
right.
consume an awful lot of shrimp per capita compared to other things like spot,
Yeah.
things that are domestic product, potentially domestic product that could be available. So that we are in essence, for want of a better word, pricing ourselves and seeking products that are not of the historical level, historical products that we had sought, other than clams, oysters, which are dependent upon nearshore water, water quality, bacterial contamination, viral contamination,
Yeah.
and historically had been eaten fresh,
Right.
uncooked.
It seems to me.
Don't eat them fresh. Don't eat them uncooked
Yeah.
today. Okay, if you eat them steamed. You eat them as clams casino or something like that, or you eat them as stuffed clams or something of that nature. The guy that wrote, oh golly, what's his name? Starts with a K. He wrote the cod, Karcher or Kucher or whatever his name.
Yeah.
He wrote the one on the oyster fishery or the big oyster or something like that, the New York demise, colonial days and whatever else, and oysters. Pogo, you know, et tu pogo.
Yeah.
MRS.
But then you take going back to this imported shrimp. Many countries ban shrimp imported from China because they put some nasty, I guess, antibiotics or this or that. Correct? I mean, they just
Well, what we wind up with in it's not so much the beastie that's being eaten, but rather if you are a farmer, you treat the field to grow the product. And
Right.
if the product that you're trying to grow has a pest, you try to eradicate the pest or kill the bacterium or whatever. So if your shrimp have a bacterial disease, then you treat the shrimp in the pond or whatever else too.
Yeah.
Or after you've harvested in the pond and you know that they have cow dung has been liberally deposited in it to keep the bloom up, or
Yeah.
some other kind of dung has been
Uh-huh.
deposited in the water to keep the algal bloom going, which is what the shrimp will be eating on, then you know you have to clear that system or treat those beasts that have been harvested to remove whatever potentially remove or inactivate
But what
those contaminants.
But what I wonder
So
about
FDA and the human health thing say, well, they're using such and such a compound, but Food and Drug has not authorized that use of that compound in anything that's directly consumable. Okay, fish culture used to use, and trout culture and whatever else. You treat fungus, as an external fungus. They treat them with salt for a little while, or they dip them in formaldehyde. It's not approved as a human consumption, and anything going directly into human consumption, it's not approvable. Same kind of things apply. But there are some pretty nasty compounds that are effective in killing certain pests, be they bacteria or whatever else we use them. What are our compounds we put on ourselves? Some of them can be pretty nasty to kill bacteria, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to eat it, but it's an external one.
Right.
Type of thing.
But our trade policy, whereas other countries might ban this or that, we say bring it on. So why are we letting this happen?
No. We're not saying bring it on. we're saying we're bringing it on, but we are making them meet certain standards in the sense of what there is, what they can and can't use in terms of products coming in can have to be certified
Yeah.
that they are not do not contain or do not have not had X, Y, or Z done to them
Yeah.
either during their growing or during their processing or in shipment, so that they would be coming in, they would meet the rough standard, if you would, of the U.S. market, U.S. health controls, and U.S. consumer safety. Consumer safety is what it gets down to.
Right.
One of the fast things that has happened or become a practice of late in terms of preparing product domestically, phonetically it's simply, or alphabet soup, it's simply called HACCP, so that there are certain treatment steps, links, changes, and whatever else that you have to certify that there is no contamination, or you decontaminate at certain stages along, or use certain practices so that you are ensuring against there being contamination or tainting, if you would, of the products that are coming out for the domestic consumption.
Okay.
So the U.S. consumer gets then HACCP certified, and that product enters the line. It's supposed to be a consumer. It is a consumer safety thing, and it's intended, quite honestly, in my opinion, it's intended as being part of consumer safety, but in the same time, a marketable tactic that the consumer feels safe in getting it. At least it has that label on it. So therefore, good housekeeping seal of approval. Okay, well, that's a good product. It's got good housekeeping seal of approval.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So
Right.
you would still feel safer eating that than you would be something that doesn't have it on the packaging or whatever else
Oh,
they
yeah.
put on there.
Right.
And that's the key words. The packaging. We don't eat seafood in and around anymore. How many butchers do you see?
I know.
You got butcher shops?
Right.
So,
Yeah. It's
so
the whole
it's,
food system is
well,
not-
look at, I'm sorry. Again, it's one of those things, the evolution.
Yeah.
And that gets back to the small farmer, the subsistence farmer,
Yeah,
the
right.
agribusiness, open ground farms.
Right.
And what has to be done there, forestry products and forestry, and
Yeah.
manipulating but be it poultry or be it grain crops, row crops, forestry, chickens,
Right.
turkeys, we are all fine-tuning the process, and then trying to fine-tune the domesticated beast, plant, or animal that we're putting in the market stream for the U.S. consumer. And then we're trying to maximize production in both a temporal sequence and or getting Beltsville turkey, getting the big-breasted turkey. okay?
Right.
That's College of Agriculture, University of Maryland, right?
Huh.
Beltsville.
Uh-huh.
When they started crossing turkeys to get the large-breasted turkey type of
Yeah.
thing.
Huh.
So
And
anyway,
now the face-
the white turkey, rather, is what it was. It wasn't the bronze
Uh-huh.
turkey, though, which was more like the natural, the real wild turkey.
Right.
They're more of a runner than they were a flyer, right? So you selectively breed something that gives larger chest muscles.
Uh-huh.
Because people like white meat, turkey breast, chicken breast.
Right.
stuff.
In the face of all this, you
Yeah.
have the slow foods movement and local foods movement.
Organic foods,
Organic foods.
whole foods,
Right, right.
That movement has been around for my career.
Hmm.
It has been enhanced as niche markets go.
Mm-hmm.
It has been enhanced in metropolitan areas, because then you can have in larger population centers, you have if it's 2% of the population, you got a bigger population. That 2%, then if it's only 100 people, you can't run a business on 2 people. Where if it's 100 million people, you can run one on 200,000 people
Right.
who are going to participate, as well as those who want to try it. So it's another whole argument about what's organic.
Mm-hmm.
If you read some of the things in Time, Newsweek, or other places that go on to the standards that are required to be able to label something as organically grown, and
Yeah, it's a little iffy. Right.
So again, that gets into the agribusiness side of it. It gets into marketing and agribusiness. But
Yeah.
that's all part of the complexities we have in society and life today. Okay, it's there. I'm glad that I was able to have the exposure to things when they were real. One, growing up, and two, throughout my career, to see those. I'm a bit saddened, not as a doomsdayist saddened, but saddened that so much of the public has no idea where the stuff comes from, that they're shoving down their gullet, or what the fish looks like, because they're getting. It sounds like I'm slamming a company out of Gloucester, Mass, and Gordon's breaded fish sticks. Wherever they come from, whatever they are, they catch fish X, Y, Z, and they freeze it in a block, and they run it through bandsaws.
Yep.
Actually, no longer saws, but actually they're water jet stuff that do that.
Wow.
That cuts the stuff up into those, and bread them. And if you look at the product, compare the box label and what's the net weight of fish in a box of braided fish sticks. It's not quite 50%, I don't think.
Wow.
It used to be more, but I'm
Right.
just saying. Like when you buy a pound of coffee, do you get a pound of coffee?
Yes.
You don't buy it in the grocery store.
Why?
It's 12 and a half ounces, or 14 ounces.
Oh,
Right?
I need to pay closer attention, don't I?
No, you do. No, I'm just saying that's unless you're doing the bulk stuff and you're
Right.
getting a weight
Right.
fashion,
Uh-huh.
then you get it by the pound. Or if you go on Broad Street, you get a true pound.
Oh,
You can get a true pound.
yeah. Okay. Getting back though
But
to
fish the same way.
yeah.
You get thumb weight or you get honest weight.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the fishmongers are gone.
It seems like in your career, you've always had an interest in not just the pure science aspect
Right.
of,
Well, I have.
but also management,
Mhm.
right? More the applied aspect, the people aspect.
Well, the scientific community has oft borne the label of ivory towered, or the
Right.
slam of that of being an ivory towered scientist. Come down out of your tower. Come down in the real world. When's the last time you ever were on a boat?
Yeah. Get away from your computer screen.
Get away from your computer screen. When I was speaking earlier about technology and about applications, that's the good and the bad, in some sense the ugly, because some things can crash and some people can manipulate things. But data cut both ways, like I said. It's the truth serum. But the truth serum then depends upon honest input. The sad or pessimistic view is that the data that we have historically is you cannot reconstruct accurately what it was. You have to go with what data you have. You then go with what other records there are, either scientific collections, to look for discrepancies back and forth. So then you try to track back historically to see how reliable are the data, the accuracy of materials. I think one of the frustrations that the public feel today in terms of management and science are that the scientists, some are still in an ivory tower and don't come down enough to communicate. I say don't come down to earth to communicate. Okay.
Right. There's people, persons.
There's some
and there's
personalities.
people that-
There are people.
Right.
There are people scientists and there are science scientists. I think part of the question becomes one of whether there is a bit of natural history enough perception or presentation balanced in a quantitative fashion with enough natural history, so that a natural history perspective, so that you have then, I'll say, the trust gaining side of the public in the, be they recreational, commercial, or environmental, understood. There's a basic understanding of the biology and cycle and trends and environment and that whole gist.
Right.
If you throw up a statistical model that's got 337 variables and you punch the computer and it runs and it takes 2 days to run, and then it burps out the answer at the end of it. What happened inside? Well, it did this. Change one variable and it does something else. Why? And then you try to explain it biologically, but if it comes out some way, shape, or form different that you don't have any, you can't see it in a biological sense. Why? There it becomes a black box issue, and you've then lost trust and or credibility with the public, the user public, etc.
Right.
And I think it's very important that you maintain user credibility, contact, trust with them. And in that sense, up on my little soapbox, if you would, or my perception of soapbox, is that I think some of the issues we have today are confounded, in a certain extent, by the data that we have as being the best we have is what we have. Okay, so we've met the criterion of Congress's act and the best scientific data. We've thrown out some that we knew were faulty, were bad. We've generated replacement data based upon those remaining data that we had trust in as being reliable, accurate, and qualitatively correct, so that we don't have anything extremes, right?
Right.
There would be the red herring in an outfit that would blow up any analysis if one was doing a fairly simple analysis or a highly complex one. The difficult part, I think, today is that we may have, with our technology, with our computing power, the ability to perform, and the penchant, proclivity, tendency, desire to put more bells and whistles on an analysis than the data perhaps warrant. So we try to make the euphemism of a silk purse out of a sow's ear fits in some cases. And perhaps it's more valuable, though not consistent with the law and the requirements of the law under the Magnuson perspective and the standards of that, to be able to give you a measure of biomass and mortality rate, because the data just do not provide, you can't estimate it, standing stock biomass. So you have to temper that with what's known in trends, what's known as relative abundance trends. In that sense, then you're more credible by dealing in that level. Perhaps not as fancy and whatever else, dueling models, or whatever else. If you go into lawsuits, which I gather there have been any number of them, one segment of the fishing community, be they recreational, commercial, or recreational, subset of the commercial or whatever else, hire a gun, These are the data.
Yeah.
Refute this, this is their analysis, this is the government's analysis. Shoot it down.
There's one going on right now in D.C., North Carolina fishermen,
Well, I'm saying
an M13C snapper.
Well,
grouper.
I'm saying that kind of a dueling models or dueling guns, I think has more muddied the water to the public and perhaps has done more of a disservice to the resource than what it was before. I'm not saying go away, put your head in the sand. Yeah, things have changed. To say that there has been no impact of whatever else on snapper grouper, I'm catching just as many. How many traps are you fishing now, sir, for black sea bass? 300. How many did you used to fish? 50. What are your catches? Well, I'm only catching half what I used to catch. Does that tell you something?
Yeah.
Well, I'm catching bigger fish. I'm catching smaller fish. The hard part is sometimes it's comments that folks will make on the record, or as a one-on-one, will be different than what they will make on the record.
Right.
But yet they will come to a meeting and be on the record and make a statement that you know is blowing smoke.
Yeah. This might not be a fair question because it's general, but all in all, in your experience, do you think fisheries management has been successful in the United States?
All in all.
I know. I guess it depends on the fishery.
To the extent that the fisheries are not politically hot, perhaps it's been more successful than others. When it gets to be a political hot potato, then you are less likely to have affected or taken an action that would be effective in doing it. It may be proposed, but it will not come to fruition because the process, in a political sense, politics is a life of compromise. So unless you do what one of the groups would say, and the other group comes in with the other pole, one of those two poles is probably true. But you're coming to the solution now and taking your action in the middle, someplace close to the middle. It may not be too far out.
Yeah.
Less than one standard deviation from the mean, okay, or whatever it may be.
Right.
But you know you're not leaning the way it needs to be. The trick is to where you say long-term, short-term gains or long-term, short-term benefits to the fishery or to the man or the fishermen, fishers, the communities, etc. Then you have the trade-offs between I got to make a paycheck, the bank is foreclosing, versus my son needs to be around, he wants to go into it, or my daughter needs to go around and wants to be into it 20 years from now. So you have that near-term, long-term perspective, and the fishing and fishermen, like a farmer, is today and this year, because I don't have the infrastructure. We do not in this country have the infrastructure built in. Fishing is not agriculture. There is not the agricultural price support system. There is not the agricultural subsidies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't have that. It's still an open frontier logic, if you would, and that has recruited a few people of that logic to it, because it is that kind of thing. Let's look at Deadliest Catch. I mean, this is one of the popular shows, and they got, whatever. And those fisheries out there are very, very valuable, very tightly managed in terms of quotas and whatever else. And what happens when you have a quota tightly managed? Same thing happens with those boats. You go hell-bent for leather, as much as you can, as fast as you can, and conditions be damned. So you get that quota rush, quota crutch, and then you get into the risky thing of health, safety, and factors. Nobody in the right sense would go out on a boat, 60 mile an hour, and a 30-foot wave. I'll go. It means I'll get $35,000 in a week's time. 2 weeks' time. Or whatever. I'm just saying that's somewhat in jest, but that's part of the whole logic about quota. And then you get the setting quotas in an open season. It's a quota rush thing.
You talked a little bit about the difficulty of managing a hot potato fishery, but the menhaden
politics. It's a political
an
one.
exception, because menhaden's been very politically hot, but it seems like it's been quite successful as far as the data collection, the relationship between National Marine Fisheries Service and the industry.
It's a historical issue, and that is that at the point in when the menhaden fisheries after post-World War II, data collections and whatever else, the fisheries were growing, technology was helping. Okay, you get a periodic block, you get synthetic nets, you get refrigeration, you can stay longer, you can catch a bigger load, you get a bigger boat. Okay, that whole logic. Small plants, large plants, up and down the coast plants, fewer plants. The thing it was in that we put together in, when was it? 92 or 95 or something like that. And Commercial Fisheries Review, thing that talked about the menhaden fishery. A lot of the history is there, the gear and whatever else, what we know about it. But that's sort of that gives you the evolution, if you would, and evolution of a fishery, evolution of management. today, I think you're looking at, on the Atlantic seaboard perhaps, the survival of survival of the last outfit, if you would, in the face of human settlement on the coast. In that you have the gentrification of the Atlantic seaboard rampant. One of the last remaining bastions of country, let's call it, outback and whatever else, that still has a fish processing plant on it, northern neck of Virginia, where there were two companies and two plants. There's now one plant, where there were lots of companies historically. Then it's been that gradual winnowing away where you now have a survivor on the Atlantic seaboard whose destiny right now is, I'll say, under assault in some sense. Under assault due to the success, perhaps due to the success of species management, one of them, of a fish management, and under assault due to the desire of man to be on every square foot of the coast. Now those two, there may be a red herring in the argument saying that it's the ecological reserve or the ecological principle. We've got to have more bait. We've got to have the bait has to be there. The menhaden is the bait. The menhaden is the food of striped bass. Well, we got more striped bass than a dog can carry on his back. You know, they're like fleas. That's a very successful fishery.
Right.
Now, there was some hard-fought issues to go through that. Striped bass fishery has been driven, and is still principally a recreational fishery. That gets to the heart of a lot of the issues that are going on now politically and that are going on under the guise of argument of environmental and fisheries management, are going on under the guise of being environmental issues or commercial overfishing or predator-prey issues, and it is one of the pitting the recreational component against the commercial component, and the fealty of the recreational component or the close similarity or bonding between the recreational community and, for want of a better word, the environmental, the NGO kind of operation. So that they're more closely allied than are a commercial entity with the NGO. Although the survival of all of the commercial entities, individual fishermen, will acknowledge that the success of they're interested in the long run and the long-term perpetuation of the fishery, and it's very closely tied. And they will argue that it's very closely tied to the environment. They will argue in support of environmental controls. They will argue in support of that. A lot of the rest of the public will not. Read my lips, no taxes. Read my lips, no taxes. But I want to have my McDonald mansion right here on the coast. We need septic tank. I'm just running a pipe out there. You know?
And so you're saying that even though this menhaden industry, you can link that to striped bass as well, which has been sort of the sacred cow fish of the recreation community.
Two things. Yeah, it's the sacred cow. It is the sacred cow on the Atlantic. Okay. I'm saying that the changes that have occurred in the environment in Chesapeake Bay are impacting the recruitment of menhaden. Recruitment being not the larval supply, but recruitment being the growing out of age 0 to 1s. Okay? In the strictest sense is from age 1-5 or age 2 to maturation. So that's the ultimate recruitment to the mature stock. But water quality has changed. Fish kills have changed, and God knows there's plenty of menhaden fish kills. There always had been a lot of it. It seems to be a penchant now in the Chesapeake Bay increasingly, and in other parts of the world increasingly, for DO-SAGs and fish kills and anoxic conditions and the sills at the mouths of rivers, the Chesapeake Bay, then you get anoxic creek. It's not a new thing. It's just becoming more frequent and more longer term, if you would, and it's expanding in area.
Right.
So that as you get more and more people, you've now got enhanced loading, the Chesapeake Bay program with its nutrient reductions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In reality, they haven't done it. I say in reality. You read the Bay program or Bay Journal, in reality, the states have not really met the reduction of the CAPS levels that they had on nitrogen, phosphorus, going in.
And there you have the environmentalists, riding herd on that issue.
But therein you then get with increased nutrients or shifts in nutrient loads in bay systems or in rivers. You go from a bottom-up question, be it blue-green algae or be it the diatom components or whatever else. It's not the same as it was in a cleaner system. Cleaner in a sense. Well, what made it cleaner? Well, oysters had a lot to do with making it cleaner. Well, how come we all the oysters? Well, we got shellfish disease. We got we got viruses. You can't eat because we got viruses. So you got the filtration. So there analyzed menhaden as a filterer. Okay. Therefore, menhaden become more important as a filterer. Therefore, you got to have more menhaden because they are both a water quality filtration expert, and number two, that they are the forage for striped bass, and any other fish that's opportunistically a carnivore, bluefish included, weak fish as well. So you have declining water quality, you have exacerbated fish kills, you have increased diseases, you have subtle shifts in community structure that is the food base of menhaden. You have a reduced number of menhaden processing plants up and down the Atlantic seaboard. So now you only have one fish company. And for the past several years, there's only been one fish company, and that's been in Chesapeake Bay. You've had striped bass being very successful in reproducing in Chesapeake Bay in particular. You have striped bass in the Hudson that don't mix that well with Middle Atlantic stuff. So this we're talking mainly a Middle Atlantic issue, Jersey to Cape Hatteras with stripers. And if you take the biomass, it's the age-old thing, and how much does it take to maintain your body?
Yeah.
Okay, 3% body weight per day. Okay, if you're going to grow, does it take 5 to 7%? If you want to grow fast, so it's more and more that you have to consume. Man doesn't seem to work the same way, but I'm saying it doesn't work the same way. But anyway, with fishes and stuff, you're looking at that level. So if you have an increasing biomass of the predator, striped bass, an increasing biomass that's consuming, and the age structure is shifting and getting larger. That means there's more biomass to support in the larger, older fishes, as well as high abundance of the younger fishes. It means they're going to be eating more and more of the prey base. Be it menhaden, dare you say blue crab, which they eat a lot of as well, spot, croaker, and on down the line. So it takes a lot of the infrastructure, the prey base underneath to support it. So the argument is going in Chesapeake Bay of setting a cap on the harvest of menhaden, which they have set, the ASMFC has set, which is not a bad thing. The point being is at that cap level, it's still primarily coming from Chesapeake Bay. You still got more and more striped bass around, so that in reality, if you're fishing outside of Chesapeake Bay, you do if the fish are available to you outside. Is it easier to go 75 miles away and fish, or is it easier to catch all the fish you need to catch at 20 miles from home? Why go past fish to get to fish? So that's the logic for why they're fishing in Chesapeake Bay. It's a bathtub, the fish are there. So I would fish there too. If I had my druthers. The awkward part becomes then of Homo sapiens looking out, and they don't like to see these big boats. Well, I like to see sailboats. I don't like to see menhaden boats.
I like to see them.
Yeah, right. But therein lies the quandary in terms of management. You're dealing between the gentrification side of things, coast, scenic sites, whatever else, the pitting of recreational, commercial, aka recreational enviro, commercial fishery, and they haven't allied the commercial fishery with anything with the environmental issues. So the perpetuation is always dependent on quality environment. The spin becomes one when you start to make recommendations back into the loop for environmental controls, environmental quality. They get rebuffed. In a sense, read my lips, no new taxes. And so that's why we have package systems down here, right? Coastal development. Power never goes out. It's a sad thing too, but it's my other windmill. So that menhaden is a good case example of management, of a management issue. The question becomes one of the fate of it, of menhaden fishery, the fate of the menhaden resource. There will continue to be menhaden around, okay? No question about it, because Chesapeake Bay is a small part of the range. It's near the heart of the range. The salvation of menhaden is still the southern leg, and it's sort of the recruitment pool, if you would, that they spend on it. And that striped bass are not super abundant in the South Atlantic.
Yeah.
And low even the Roanoke. Okay, what's the status of the Roanoke striped bass? Roanoke River striped bass population.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
What's the status?
Yeah.
Recovering.
Ing?
Was it recovered?
Oh, I don't.
Actually, they were declared recovered.
Well, I was sort of curious because the ploy had been one of under the coastal management striped bass. It's considered, North Carolina. The classic issue North Carolina always had was we're different.
Right. Yeah.
Regardless of the fisher, we're different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's different down here. So anyway, there is mixing between the Roanoke system and others, but it's at a point of high population abundance. So you have a mixing along the coast. The fish come out under higher population levels in the Roanoke, and indeed you get mixing from the coastal stock into the Roanoke system when there are high levels along the coast as well. So therein the case had been one of getting the right size of fish harvested under striped bass is what opened up things as far as striped bass, recreational, commercial. It's like blue fishing. If you want to harvest, you like to eat an 8-inch fish. Eat an 8-inch fish. That's chopper blues. You gotta have them. Gotta have them. It's the New Jersey logic. Striped bass, a bigger fish.
Have you noticed any in your long history with NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service? Have you noticed any shifts in, management philosophy over the years, or has it stayed pretty steady despite the changing context and circumstances?
I'd say the management strategy is under NOAA, under NIMS, NOAA Fisheries. The euphemism becomes one. What do you call it? What do you call it? It pretty much is matched to what the law requires, the guidelines,
which do change over time. So necessarily,
to the extent of where they've changed, then there is some change in it. To the extent of where it's a domestic fishery is one thing, and it's pretty tightly tied to Magnuson. Where it's interjurisdictional, it's tied to the Interjurisdictional Act, and trying to get all of the states to go along with something on interjurisdictional fisheries is always a trick as well. The hook became the passage of the Atlantic Coastal Act, where there became a hammer at the end of it that thou had to comply with if the board said do so and so. But that was also engendering a lot of shades of 1860s. Okay, and you got five south of Hatters, and you got 10, 11 north of Hatters.
Right.
It's them and us.
Yeah.
So there we go again. And indeed, North Carolina tried to secede from the SMOC at some point. Virginia had the same tactic legislatively. When things get a little hot, then you take that tactic. But there are common threads, and I think that both territorial sea fisheries and the federal fisheries have tried of late, and has become increasingly bound to congressional guidelines, if you would, mandates, and the hardest thing that exists, where we are today, is that Congress has put mandates on thou shalt have a measure of biomass and a measure of mortality rate, sustainability, and whatnot. Coming up with those numbers can require some
Thou shalt stop overfishing by 2010.
Check.
That's quite
Now,
an order.
Now, how do you do that?
Right.
And then you read, it's the old, what is the funny paper thing? All in the Family. Not me. Didn't do it.
Yeah.
Get that whole game being played. Will be played. But it gets down to hard-nosed stuff, and in a sense, then the awkward point becomes what's the role of the federal government in federal fisheries? What's the role of the federal government in territorial sea fisheries? In federal fisheries, and if it's domestic entirely, then it becomes one of there should be, if the council doesn't do it, the law had been 1 year, previously it had been 1 year, declared overfished, give me the action, put it in place, a rebuilding plan. Now to end overfishing, that's the F factor, fishing factor, fishing mortality, may require some pretty drastic, the euphemism that the director of fisheries, present director of fisheries, draconian measures. Yeah?
Is that a Hogarth word?
No, the present director of fisheries.
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Okay.
In North Carolina fisheries. Draconian measures, which was Lewis's.
Oh.
Lewis's
Lewis,
jargon.
of course.
Lewis's jargon
Of course.
for comments made in count. And any number of other people who use the same
Yes.
terminology, but I'm just saying that for a little levity. It gets damn tight.
Yeah.
And fairness and equity come into the picture for federal fisheries standards, national standards. How do you do that? Now the question is, well, the council will never do it. And the council is a political system. The federal government and the WTH, William Thomas Hogarth, okay? The buck stops here. It's like the man sitting in the White House. The buck stops here. Bill Hogarth is the head of National Marine Fisheries Service.
Right.
The buck stops here. His regional ambassador, Roy Crabtree, the buck stops there. So it will probably get down to the point of as a director, regional or director of NIMS, as an agency, say, okay, only way you can get there, analytically, you can't go one step, let's phase it in. By the year so-and-so, there will be no longer overfishing. How do you do it? Folks, count your toes for 2 years. Thank you. And you can have 10 pounds. Thank you. You can have 100 pounds. They're running some fisheries in the mid-Atlantic, and the nearshore fisheries in the mid-Atlantic, small trawl quotas of 100-pound fish. Killing a lot of other stuff, probably, but you can land 100 pounds of this. That's your daily maximum landing. It's like we're doing in North Carolina, doing the fluke.
Right.
The fluke fishery, so many pounds per 2-week interval, 1 week, 2 week interval, to be able to manage to a quota. Getting control in fishing mortality means you almost get down to where you got to have a quota. How much can be harvested, right?
Right.
Because F is the total population, the amount removed. What's the ratio? Log, boom, that's your fishing mortality rate. If you're catching too many, okay, what's it take to get F down to where it's not overfishing? Well, you can only harvest. It says you're going to go to a quota, basically, to me. You will go to a quota. Now you have technology, and what's the economic break-even point for a commercial operation? What's the economic break-even point for a recreational operation?
Yeah.
Is it the experience? That pits, to me, pits the two components in a dogfight, and a butting of heads, solid butting of heads,
Right.
which doesn't stop at the council level. It doesn't stop at the regional.
No.
You have your guys call my guys, and my guys will call his guys, and his guys will call the big round-topped house, and the round-topped house will call the one, the square, the rectangular house, and the rectangular house will get on Hogarth's butt through the Secretary of Commerce.
Yeah.
So therein lies what negotiated compromise will come out of that, I guess.
Do you think fisheries have been managed about as best as they can be, or has there been any, methods that have bothered you or irked you, and if you were king, you would change?
Czar.
What is czar?
Czar.
Yeah, if you're a fish czar,
That's the euphemism. If you were a fish czar, what would you do? I won't say that the things that bother me as a matter of, it's been benign neglect. I go back to that end of it for decades. and it's still too much of a political process, and giving science its due. As soft as some of the science may be, as soft as the data may be, if we don't try to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but rather use the data to the extent that we can, and use peer group public input, reasoned, rational public input that stands the veracity test, if you would, that it's real and is supported by that community, not just a polar statement off the wall.
Yeah.
In cases where you don't have the information, then the modeling or the analyses that are done are keep it simple, stupid kind of things that you can understand, and this is where it seems to be. And take that tactic rather than building a house of cards that's subject to somebody removing a variable that's subject to question, to litigation, and the whole house falls down, and it puts you 3 years back behind, in 3 years in arrears. Okay, well that gets me 3 years, 3 more years sufficient, kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Or that if you were fish czar, then the role of science would have to be, as was stated, that science input would be independent and would become the basis from which the others were going. There would be this is what you can do, decide how you want to do it. It hasn't really come into practice. It's been mouthed, said, repeated. The scientific community might like to have it believed, or would like to believe it themselves, I guess. But it hasn't stood the test of the politics of the situation, the social dynamic. It has not had that amount of gut will.
It's always compromised by the push and the pull. And,
at least that's what the payout has been to that end of it. And that to me is one of the saddened things, to see how fluid that could get at sometimes.
Right.
And I don't like to see arguments made, lawsuits filed for I won't use the term for. I don't like to see or hear of lawsuits threatened or actually filed for less than a true issue, for a no issue, just to be making the case. Because in making the case, what you do is everything else inside of the agency or inside of the state, for that matter, the same kind of thing. Somebody's going to sue the state, we'll sue the fisheries for so-and-so.
Right.
What's it do? Everything else comes to a halt.
Yeah.
So what happens in a regional office? What happens in headquarters? Well, then you get the State Department, you get the commerce lawyers, you get the NOAA lawyers, it's lawyer speak, and you get the data accumulation, and then you build the administrative record. So the regional office has to have their people together. They have to get with the science center to get all of the data, get all of the reports, get all of the stuff.
Right.
Boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes. So then they ship that all off to wherever it is, and then it comes 3 months, 6 months, a year. It's buying time. It's all the frustration level. But what you've done in the meantime is the underpinnings that the infrastructure that was going to support the whole process has for a red herring issue come to a screeching halt. So you're not making progress on things that really need to get done, but rather you're addressing a red herring issue that has no basis in reality and no substantive issue whatsoever. That to me is one of the larger frustrations I think that anybody in government, be it state or federal, would see or in this coming of age in technology. A letter for information request is a wonderful thing. A FOIA request is a wonderful thing. It's a valuable part. It's oftentimes abused in some sense. Used or abused in use, if you would, because it's recognized as being a ploy that will bring the system to a halt, or will